something slightly different from what I normally do. I wanted to share a little review of this wonderful book. This is Flowers of Blood by Sara Bonadea George. Wonderful Swedish herbalist practitioner. Really, really fantastic book, and specifically really fantastic to me for a few reasons. So before I jump straight into I won't go over too much because I don't want to spoil it. It's not a hugely long book, but yeah, what it lacks in length, it makes up for in usability from a practical perspective, as well as from a simply interesting folklore and story perspective. But I just wanted to share just briefly a little intro. So I've known Sara through Instagram for a while. She's doing, at least from what I've seen online and from what we've chatted about, she's doing sort of similar things to me, which is just more heavily plant-focused practice in a northern tradition. And for me, specifically, who's been spending a lot of time in Sweden the last 4 years, spending summers on Gotland, things like this, to be learning and reading her writing has really helped me deepen my the Swedish aspects of my practice when I've been in Sweden. And it's really helped me sort of see the links between the plant folklore, especially of all of Northern Europe, really. A lot of the legends and myths that are from a much more Christian perspective, which I think links in many ways more the British and the Scandinavian, for sure, the wider Nordic stuff, links all of these things together more, well, I suppose more deeply really than the pagan stuff as a sweeping general statement. Obviously that's not true for absolutely everything, but I feel like the Christian stuff is often sort of overlooked by people. They look at it and they think, oh, okay, this is Christian folklore, why do we need to know this? But I think just that, Christian folklore, is already really interesting, because in that we have so much stuff that obviously the church would not have endorsed, would not have encouraged people to have this folk belief around. So already you have a bunch of surviving pagan elements in that, which is for me, that's the most sort of interesting, the juiciest chunks of info. Really in folklore for me, I find coming between 1700 to early 1900s, this time period, this 200 years after Renaissance, everything, looking back to all the things, and then a good gap of time between that, the sort of resurgence of a lot of Greek and Roman stuff, and lots of sort of pagan-ish thought revival. Especially then in Iceland, you have that period of time is when a lot of the folklore was collected. Really, then from 1800s, 1900s, you have a lot of folklore collected and written down, stories that haven't really changed over a long period of time. Lots of Christian stuff in that, which again, people feel, or I tend to see people looking at this as sort of a not as interesting and not as important thing, which is really sad. But a lot of this folklore is what makes up a lot of witchcraft practice. Obviously, there's no unbroken line between ancient pagan religion and contemporary witchcraft. There's no Margaret Murray reality, which we know now for sure, after somewhat more, I guess, scrutinous analysing by historians and whatnot, but and archaeological evidence that doesn't exist. But that's beside the point. The Christian stuff is where, for me, I find the most sort of juicy, interesting bits of practice. And for me, who raised Catholic, baptized Catholic, have done a sort of full circle on my wanting to distance myself entirely from Catholicism, mostly as a queer person going through Catholic primary, secondary school from age 4 to 16, that is, of being in a very Catholic environment, partly because of that, and then also finding witchcraft and practicing witchcraft and building my witchcraft practice from age of 12 really, to what it is now. I've been through the entire circle of the Christian stuff. I've definitely seen from both sides of the people who really are super against it, the people who are not um, particularly against it but don't want to look into it. And then I found now that it's really the looking into it which is the most fruitful, or what's been the most fruitful for me, especially in Iceland, where you have a very, very like strong mix of Christian and pagan stuff in like quite a unique way as well, which is very cool. Um, but it's really like it stressed to me the importance of looking into the Christian folklore. Anyway, I've gone around and around on this. What I want to say about this really is just it's nicely specific to my practice, involving saints, involving prayers to God, Mary, that sort of thing, with my witchcraft practice, which I know a lot of folk practitioners do in different traditions and from different places as well. But it's been really nice to find a book that is on my specific area of interest, which is plant folklore, that takes this into account and is not in any way like bashing the Christian folklore, but is looking to it and is saying like, okay, here's a bunch of really interesting, really useful bits of folklore, which can really help build out your practice, especially with plants and involving plant spirits, that sort of thing. So this book has been absolutely wonderful for that. I received it in, I think, March this year, so it's been quite a while. It's now it's October, and I'm finally getting around to this review. Yeah, I received it in March. I started reading it, and then I had a couple of other things to finish, so I didn't actually finish it until June this year. But when I did get into it, I did not put it down. I read through it very quickly. I was also in Sweden for a while when I was reading it, so I took it specifically as well to read in Sweden to get as much sort of into the ground with it as I could. And it's been fantastic. So I want to share a couple of bits around that. Why it's been so specifically good for me, with a fairly heavy Christian influence to my practice. But also I want to stress why it would be very interesting and very good for people who don't have that particular influence or aspect to what they do in their witchcraft practice. Because in general, it's just a fantastic collection of plant lore. And I'm sure that although it's a lot of it's specifically Swedish, but coming from Christian folklore, so there's a lot of it in here that might at first seem, okay, I'm not practicing in Sweden, why is this interesting for me, or why should I look into this or use the plants in this way? And then you look at the folklore and where a lot of it comes from, and the similarities that I found between at least this and British stuff and Icelandic stuff. I'm sure Norwegian and Danish stuff too. Most of Northern Europe probably will have a lot in common with this through Christianity. But obviously beyond that too, like wherever these plants grow that she mentions in this book, there are ways that we can work with these plants, taking from this folklore as inspiration. So I just wanted to say that before I dive into what I've loved specifically about this book. Is just the general overview. So yeah, I'm gonna go through a couple of reasons why I think it's fantastic, and a couple of my favorite sort of snippets of this book, but without giving too much away, because I don't want to, I want to encourage people to get this book because it's really good. I don't want to give away all of the bits beforehand, but nice. So it starts off with a poem called The Tree of Cain. Obviously Cain and Abel, Christian folklore, by biblical, not folklore, it's in the Bible, but it gives a really good example of how these things are blended, how the Christian folklore is blended with the more sort of traditional land-based plant folklore. And it mentions a couple of the plants that she then mentions later in this book. For one, also love the art chosen for this as well. One thing that I love about this book as well, actually, I will say, is all of the illustrations, all of the pictures, all of the art in it. It's fantastic. I believe this is, because this is from Hexen Press, I believe this is something they've done with many other books. I've seen a couple of the other books online. very good art choices, very nice, moody, um, often like very dark woodcut sort of stuff, which I love. So Sarah goes into detail immediately on anecdotes and ways that she's connected with plants and ways that she's been able to merge the Christian stuff with what she does. Which for me I think is one of the most interesting things about this book, is that the entire way through she's talking about specific experiences that she's had with these plants, specific things, bits of lore that she's related to them, bits of information that she's learned from mentors in the past, things like this. For me, as a practitioner, I find that really interesting and really affirming as well, to see how other people have done this. As well as an author and a writer, I think for me that's one of my favorite things, is to see how people have actually, how they've done it themselves. I feel like that's where the interest is for me. Like, there's a lot of books that are sort of witchcraft 101, herbalism 101. They're great to start with, but I want to see people's experience. I want to see, as well as sort of citing your sources, which of course you should do, as well as citing like all the folklore, everything like this. Um, the actual sort of experience of it, the anecdotes of, okay, this is my experience with this plant, I find so much more interesting, really, than just, here is this plant, this is what it does. And so throughout this book, there's a lot of that, and that's very, very cool to me. So one of my favorite plants is bittersweet nightshades, as Solanum dulcamara. She talks about that in this book. It's not a plant that grows commonly in Iceland. I know of one plant in the entire country that I've been able to find, but that's definitely like a garden escapee. It's not a native plant here. But when I've been in the UK, it's a plant that I look out for often, and in Sweden I see it all over the place. And she mentions, one thing that I love about this is that she mentions specific places of, one day I saw bittersweet nightshade winding through the hedge close to my house in Uppsala. Another day I discovered it in a railway crossing in my neighbourhood. And yet another time by the 1920s school building near where I live. All these things, it's like, I love, really, and I'll say this again, but like, I love seeing authors talk about specifically where they found plants. And I know that's a bit, most people will be like, oh, who cares? But for me, I really love that, because, yeah, you have this real personal connection to this plant. And it's also like the meeting of the plant spirit that I really find the most interesting to hear about, where you've seen this plant, where it grows, obviously based on, depending on what sort of approach you're taking, but based on what I do with working on Agrippa's sort of planetary distinctions of traits and things, and where plants grow, determining what planet rules which plant, and where these plants grow, determining what they can be used for, all this sort of stuff, to see where specific plants grow, and to see where people have recognized these plants, or where these plants have like jumped out at them. This is something that I always find really interesting. And simply just in that as well, denoting like where they grow, you can add an entire layer onto your practice of, okay, I found this plant in this specific place, therefore based on the traits of this place, I can work it for maybe more specifically Saturnine things, or more specifically martial things, that sort of thing. So that sort of stuff I love. But she talks about, there's so many. She talks about a bunch of plants in this book that I love. Hawthorn specifically as well. She talked quite a lot about like hawthorn as the holy hawthorn, which I believe there's a specific species of hawthorn that's maybe white hawthorn or something. I need to double check this, because it's not a plant that grows in Iceland, as well as hawthorn is a plant that I work with much more in the UK. Sweden sometimes as well, but it's Cretaceous monogyna is the one that I know in the UK, at least, not this special white hawthorn. But the holy aspects of this plant, as like the crown of thorns, for example, this is obviously super Christian, but there are so many ways that we can work this into our folklore, specifically like plant crowns as well, making like floral crowns, especially like around midsummer. That's a thing that people still do, making flower crowns, as a tool, as a sort of a tool for specific plant communication. This is something that I will often do with yarrow. It helps, the traits of yarrow as like an opener to spirits, and to help sort of break down the walls and get you more in contact with the spirits. Wearing a crown of yarrow, for example, is something that I do in my practice. Like I'll make them when I'm out in the nature doing various like Udasata and stuff, sitting out and communicating with the plants and the spirits there, because it really helps break down those walls. And it's the traits of this plant can be worked simply as a flower crown, and you taking the time to sit with them and wind them up, and maybe speak a little charm as you're doing it, that sort of thing. She mentions a bunch of these, but what I find really interesting is there's a lot of the more sort of nature spirit folklore in Sweden. So you have like the Skogsrå, it's like the king of the woods. They're like Rå is like the lord, I suppose. I need to Swedish. I'm learning Swedish very slowly. It's not on my like top list of priorities at the moment. But the Skogsrå as the forest lord, basically the king of the woods. She talks about this folklore too, and brings in this much more sort of pagan element to the Christian stuff, and I love this. I love this this combination of these two things, because there would have been a point in time, before the modern age, where people had, for one, either this fear of evil, and so then this acknowledgement of these spirits as something demonic, because that's what the church teaches, and there would have been this like actual real belief in these spirits in the nature by everyone, which now is a thing that only really practitioners hold anymore. A lot of people just don't believe in these things anymore. But this idea of it was very Christian to realize that these spirits were out there, and to acknowledge these spirits, and acknowledge them by saying, hey, you have no power over me, or acknowledging them by saying that they're evil, which of course as practitioners we know that's not the case. Nature spirits are not evil. This is Christianity doing this. But what I love in there's one chapter that she's written about the Skogsrå, and she talks about the importance of this, and the importance of this as the sort of king tree, like the one, not just king, I don't want to gender it, but like the overarching most prominent or most powerful or oldest or biggest tree in a place. And that folklore I love, because that's stayed alive in Sweden for sure, as this bit of folklore. This is the tree that you go to make offerings. This is the tree that you spend time around, maybe honor at different festivals, different times of the year. And this specific spirit that lives in this tree, often sometimes demonized as like a folk devil, sort of, I guess, in the same way as like the Leshy has gone from being like a nice old man of the woods in more Slavic folklore, to being more sort of like a folk devil and a trickster spirit, that sort of thing. Similar vibes with some of these stories in Sweden. But one thing that she does in this book is that she talks about specific plant folklore, and then she'll give a wider context and a wider perspective of, hey, this is the way that things are thought about, or were thought about, still are by practitioners. Here's what it pays really to understand and to look into when we're working with plants, when we're honoring, when we're saying our thank you to the land, which we should be doing when we're gathering plants for anything. Who should we be addressing that to? Is there like a point of contact in the nature? And although this is not a specific guide for that, what you can do is read through this, see, okay, this is what she's doing, this makes sense. Here's another list of examples of why this is a smart move within a much more animist practice that draws from Christianity too. Although Christianity is not an animist centered religion, we can still find ways of working with this working with this folklore in a more contemporary way, bringing in all the Christian stuff with all the pagan stuff that's survived. So it's very cool. I don't want to read like too much, because I don't want to give away too many things. One thing that I do love is that she's included lovely bits of poetry, and some I think maybe are hers as well, because some there's no name next to quote who the poems have come from. But that's one thing as well. Corinne Boyer also does this, where she puts various quotes and various she's got her own invocations, I guess. Venification, is that the word? She's got her own sort of prayers and venifications, I guess, around these plants, and that's something that I do in my practice, and something I've been sharing a little bit more recently, especially with Rose. I've been talking about that on Patreon recently. more recently this year, sharing my sort of prayer to Rose that I speak. And that's one thing that I love in this, is that there are, when you include poems around plants, for one, for one, to appreciate it for what it is as a poem, that's nice. And that's enough for many people. But for two, you then have a prayer, essentially. Really, you have a way of giving this thanks, or giving this offering, or venerating the spirit through this sort of affirmation of who they are and what they do. And through these sort of little prayers, basically, around plants, you can use them in your practice, absolutely, to call in the powers of these plants. And that's one thing that I'm exploring a little bit more recently. Well, I say recently, in the last few years. But one thing that I'm a little bit more into is not just simply gathering the plant and saying thank you, but while I gather the plant, I'll speak about the plant. I'll say what it does. I'll talk about its folklore. Had to have that in prayer, or short song form, even if that's the way you want to go. To sing it or to say it as you're doing the thing, for one, is a really good memory aid to lock that information in your brain. But for two, is a really good method of venerating the plant and saying oh, okay, Yarrow, I gather you, Yarrow, bringer of dreams, healer of wounds, that sort of thing. To even go, as simple as that. You don't have to put layer and layer of metaphor on it. You can just simply say, this is what you do, this is who you are. I find that really, really wonderful, and a really good way to bring those sort of simple methods of venerating plants into your practice. So that's also one reason why I recommend this book, is because she includes a bunch of really nice little poems, and sayings and things about different plants. References it all very well as well, so I like that a lot. That's something that I look out for. But yeah, to be able to look through a book and see, okay, here's this little poem, oh, that's nice. On a deeper level, hey, I can definitely try and use this in my practice and see what I can get from this, see how I can get any deeper, as well as getting the sort of the cultural context that you need, which is really important as well. And I talk about that a lot with Icelandic practice, to have a source of cultural context also, to have it broken down in easy terms, really, really beneficial. So one thing I really, really recommend for anyone who wants to get into plant gathering, or herbalism, or any sort of green focused magical practice, in Sweden, or if you are of Swedish descent, or if you spend a lot of time in Sweden, or you live in Sweden, or whatever, or not, not just in Sweden, as I've said, if you live in more general Northern Europe, where these plants are growing all in the same place. Many spots, I'm sure, in North America as well, where you have all these plants growing in the same place. And somewhat, at least with the Christian aspect of the culture, you have a lot of similarities for sure in North America with Northern Europe in that regard. To be having this book as somewhat of a sort of handbook and a guidebook to these plants, really, really beneficial. I guess sort of went the extra mile in that I was reading this while I was in Sweden. I was gathering plants on Birka, on the island, that I go to these events with friends each year. I did a plant walk this last summer there, and this was really helpful in that, to help. I didn't just take the information and regurgitate it, but I quoted this book a couple of times, and I said, oh, people need to check out this book, because there's a really good bunch of information in there, about specifically Swedish stuff. But when you look at the stories of these different plants from different places, especially in Northern Europe and wider Europe for sure, loads of similarities, loads of ways we can tie these plants into our practice, loads of really sort of, it's the why we do the thing with this plant that I'm most interested in, and that's what this book informs on. So I won't read too much. I won't read too much from the actual book, because I don't want to give away too much. But in terms of working with different plants, she talks about water lilies. I love water lilies. They don't grow in Iceland, sadly. You can actually, I know people growing them in fish tanks, but yeah, not in the wild at least. To see her bring together lilies and the water spirit of Sweden, and Scandinavia for sure. To have these comparisons drawn is really cool. For one, like because it's interesting folklore, it's nice, it's cool to learn, but also to see how these things are linked and how you have the Swedish name for one of the Swedish folk names for the water lily is the rose of the neck, so like the water spirit rose. So this is one sort of, I guess it's a bit the cautionary tales of they're tied together because sometimes, you know, if you're swimming in the lake, you can get caught on the like the tendrils of the water lily. That's dangerous, and that could be the water spirit dragging people down. It could just be somewhat of like a cautionary tale metaphor. But when we look deeper at the actual spirit of this plant and we're working with it in more of an animistic perspective, this is a really good example of the connection between these things. And I really, I really recommend if you like water lilies, if you like St. John's wort, if you like rowan, if you like hawthorn, if you like any of the plants that this book mentions, definitely buy this book and read about them and read about their specific folklore, because it's really, really interesting and it's really cool. I don't really know what more I can say as a recommendation for this book now. But it's been fantastic to read. I literally consumed it very, very quickly. Yes, because it's my specific niche of Northern European plant folklore, but also just because it's nicely written, it's well written, it's the anecdotes, it's the personal stories, it's the cultural context, the comparisons, all these things that this book does is wonderful. And really this is inspiring for me as a writer on the same subject as well, to keep pushing myself and do more and more, to deliver something of this quality. So I want to say just a massive thank you to Sara, and a massive thank you to Kazim from Hexenpress. Thank you so much for sending me this copy. And I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't. So I want to say a massive thank you to Sara for writing this wonderful book, and a massive thank you to Kazim from Hexenpress for publishing it. And I've linked all the info on Sara, on Hexenpress, in the description under this, both on Patreon and on YouTube. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch this, and I really, really recommend. I can't stress it enough, really. If you're interested in plants, if you're interested in plant folklore, if you're interested in Northern European folklore, folk magic, this is something that I think will be very, very beneficial for a lot of people. So thank you very much for watching this, and I hope to do a couple of more book reviews. I think it's quite, for me, I get very impassioned about things when I'm into them, and I hope that comes across in a way that's somewhat enjoyable, at least to listen to. So I think I should do this with a couple of more books. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch this, and I will see you all in the next one.